This is the voice of Bold Business Radio, and I am your host, Jessica Duell of Red Direction. You are listening to Program 64, Delegation versus Dumping. Now, when I first started thinking about this, I really wanted to dig into what a dump was and what a delegate is and why they're different and how to change, because we don't want to be dumping on anybody ever. And then it occurred to me, there's some of that, and then there's more. What's the underlying piece? What are the skills that we need? How do we look at these things and notice so that we can do what we need to do? Then I was ready to go. And Mark, being the awesome guy that he is, showed up and we had a fantastic dialogue. So I invite you to learn a little bit more about Mark at our website. And here is a little bit about him for our show. Mark Carruthers is a change facilitator and has worked in 9 industries, including agriculture, construction, wholesale distribution, and high tech, both as an entrepreneur and an employee. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Duell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
You know, one of the reasons I came up with this topic, Mark, is because it's everywhere, right? This concept of we hear it in our work, we hear it in our home. How do we delegate? How do we do less? How do we automate more? How do we? Because our life will be better if, blah, 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 and on and on and on. And one of the reasons that I know Eva thought of you when we were talking about putting the show together was because of all of the business experience that you have and being both in a leader type position and an employee type position. So you've been on both sides across, I think I was counting like 9 industries. And so let's start here. I want to know from you, what does delegation mean to you?
Delegation means taking some sort of task or responsibility and asking or assigning it to somebody else. It doesn't necessarily absolve you of the outcome or what has happened or what is going to happen, but you're trying to share a workload, take advantage of knowledge or just time to stretch your time out and achieve more and perhaps better by assigning it to other people. Meanwhile, still being in the background, but not micromanaging and ensuring that the objective is met.
If you were to think back, how many people micromanaged something which got in the way of being able to have something like an easier way to delegate or a fulfilling way to delegate?
It's probably half, because you've got half the people who actually know how to manage properly and half that don't. You've got some that manage at each end of the spectrum well or very badly. Problem is that regardless of what happens, it's either a positive influence on those who are doing the work, having it been delegated to them, or it can certainly be a negative, not just in what you're achieving, but also in how the individual who has been delegated the assignment perceives it, how they appreciate what they've been given and what they're doing and the management level around them. And it's huge. And I would say it's about 50-50 of good and bad.
Okay. I'm going to totally take this out of the workplace for a couple of minutes because it is my opinion, and you may agree or disagree, and I can't wait to hear about this, Mark, is that the way we act in our home as an adult in the life that we live outside of the work that we do is pretty telling for how we're actually working at work.
I think that basically by the time a person gets into a management position, much of their whole processes, how they treat people and all the rest of it have already been achieved. And whether that's the result, well, most time it's a result of a home life, perhaps other influences, whether it's church, whether it's social groups, whether it's school. Those influences are what make a person who they are by the time they're getting into some sort of either subordinate or management role. And I think a lot of that's there. Now, in the same respect, I will say that even through my marriage, the way I am has changed immensely, because as far as I'm concerned, a marriage is a partnership. And if one person tries to control it or is submissive, it's going to be telling, and those sorts of things are going to reflect in the workforce, at home. It doesn't matter where it is. Yes, people can change, but I think their basic mannerisms are ingrained at a fairly young age based on their environment.
Sometimes could micromanagement be misunderstood? Not that this is any better, but could be misunderstood for a dictatorship.
Oh, certainly. I think so. They can be fulfilling some sort of thing that they're missing outside their lives, no question. In some cases, I've seen people that at home are the lesser force, I'll say, or the lesser strength.
Yeah.
And when they get to work, boy, they make up for it. Their staff, their people they work with feel that. And it makes it terribly difficult.
It is difficult. And I can even share a story about that that's happened to me in the last 18 months. This was a consulting situation. And so I was part of the team, getting my hands dirty, doing the work, being a contributing member of the group that had a deliverable as its outcome. The decision was made, the path was chosen, the milestones were marked, everybody in the group was getting along. And then all of a sudden there was this one person. This person stood in the way of everything. Every single other person on the team with any action to move it forward because it was not right, because it wasn't the way things were done. Isn't that a good one? Because I mean, and the list goes on. Every derivative of that you could. Every single thing we had to do had like twice as many obstacles as necessary because somebody was inserting themselves and making an obstacle along the way. It is what it is. So just noticing it more than anything else is that there was a pretty terrible home life. There was a lot of overbearingness at home. There was no voice at home. There was this lack of understanding and security there. And the only way this person knew how to get security was to know everything ahead of time. So when we were not in that person's head, we were in the way. And it made a very difficult working relationship. And when the project was over, I was so relieved. It got to the point, I was like, I would come home and it became my life. I'm like, I don't understand what I'm doing. It didn't occur to me that it was outside of the team. Life lesson is maybe the first thing is let's look at ourselves. But if we don't see anything, we switch gears and we go, well, maybe it's them. And that's totally out of our control. So how do we think about this concept differently? Because relationships really matter to make things work.
And the relationships take two parties as a minimum. Yes. And it's got to have everybody in agreement with the same goals, objectives, frame of mind. It's got to work together, whether that's in a marriage or whether it's in a work relationship. Again, whether it's teammates or whether it's superior and subordinate, you're still got ability to work together, not trying to empower yourself over everybody else. Sometimes that's intentional. Sometimes the people don't even realize they're doing it. It's just their nature, or as you say, an outside influence that is bearing down on them that they don't even realize what they're doing, whereas their team members are really struggling to deal with it. That happens on an all too regular of a basis. I will say that where I work now, where we have quite a number of people, and when I was in the HR capacity, which I'm only share now, I always try to watch for those things because you can see that in people. You see it in their looks, in their body language, in their language, how they get along with people. And we always try to address that because when you've got a team that's one is being difficult and it's affecting the whole team, that can put a halt to almost everything, the goal.
It sure can. And I know we got off a little bit of this concept of delegation. I think it's a good lead in though, because we have to understand the personalities that we're working with, what we control, what we can't control. There's this concept of delegation, and there's some serious drawbacks to choosing not to delegate. Have you ever been in a situation, Mark, where you didn't delegate and you look back and you go, man, I know exactly who would have been perfect for this now that it's over?
Absolutely. Sometimes time constraints, talent constraints, only from the perspective is that from the fact that you don't recognize the talents and the teams and the people that work with you. And one of the last areas you talk about is skills you've got to be able to delegate properly. And that's recognition of the talents that, or potential talents within the people that you're working with. Or if you're hiring somebody, you've got to be able to quickly, in the case of a hiring, their potential, maybe not what they know now. There's a lot of talk in hiring about let's not hire skills, let's hire soft skills, and then we can teach them the skills and give them the knowledge. In the same respect, delegating, that's part of it. That's teaching, that's training, that's mentoring, that's coaching, that's allowing them to delegating properly to run with what you've given them and achieve something which trains them, strengthens their abilities. Delegating is a huge part that so many people don't do properly. Have I seen that? Absolutely. There were times where I time constraints as much as anything. I couldn't delegate or didn't feel I could. And afterwards I was thinking, geez, that was a lot of work and maybe I should have, or at least brought them in and helped teach somebody. And in hindsight is 2020. Absolutely. And I like to think that I've learned from those mistakes. Those are learning sessions when you actually finally do achieve, geez, I did that wrong. I should have done something else. And hindsight is a great teacher. So
there's a related piece here that I want to bring in. And this is this current notion that, no, we don't have to do it all. And we're talking about business owners. So hire people to do what you hate. You know you're going to run a good business when you have somebody else do the work that you hate. Now, I consider that one of my soapboxes. So before I run away like a freight train, I want to hear what you think about that, Mark, and then we'll just dialogue back and forth about it some.
Experienced that sort of person early in my career. I went through the university cooperative program to become a chartered accountant, and I had a chartered accountancy finalist and then became a CA who was my direct superior. And every job we went to, I got the menial, mundane jobs, and that's all I got. Didn't give me much sense of fulfillment or learning. It was pretty simple stuff. And so I experienced that. When I became a senior student in accounts, I tried to, having learned from that, give the juniors, yes, some of the lesser challenging jobs because I had better things I should be doing. I gave them that, but I also gave them some pieces where they would be learning and progressing as well, and hopefully not just feeling like they were being used and abused as almost slave labor. It just gives them more of a sense of purpose and a better attitude towards what you're trying to achieve. Jobs, I'll do anything. People will ask you, and I'm the person here. I tell people, and I'm the business manager here, I said, I have a plunger and I don't know how to use it. So I'll do anything. I was taught to, when there's something needs to be done, do it regardless of whether it's a not so nice job or not.
Right. So the willingness to roll up your sleeves and the willingness for me to roll up my sleeves. And there were a couple of things that everybody listening, you're talking to the choir here. So just hang with us for a minute because we could talk about this all day and be on the same page. Did you want to add something, Mark?
I was just going to say, in the same respect, you've got to have the ability to know, no, I must pass this on. I must delegate this. It's silly. It's a waste of time and talent for me to be doing this. And it's better done by somebody else so I can do things that are more important.
I think entrepreneurship is great. I think solopreneurship is great. I think virtual assistants are great. I think people who hang their shingle doing skills that they are really good at are great. I think the people who hire those wonderful business owners that are really good at data entry or transcribing or admin or scheduling or you name it. I mean, there's all kinds of things and they're really good at it and they love it. The people who are going to them and asking for them, I would say upwards of half are going because they despise it. They don't want to deal with it. They're like, oh, this is just a part of what's going on. Why is this even happening? And to play devil's advocate, we all need somebody like that in our life. However, if we don't do it, we don't know we hate it, number one. And sometimes hate is disguised as something else. I'm not good at it. Well, so delegating isn't necessarily the correct word. There would be a better phrase. Delegate to get the talent to make this a most effective use of everybody's time and the most fulfilling to everybody. What would you add to that?
One of my pet peeves are people who delegate and I'll ask, well, why aren't you doing it? Well, I've been here a long time and I shouldn't have to do that.
Right.
And I'm going, well, you've got the skill set. It was given to you and you delegated it. Now you're sitting around doing nothing because you felt it was beneath you. I have a real issue with that. As far as I'm concerned, we work together and pull as a team, and what needs to be done gets done regardless of who, but still utilizing the talents that are there to their fullest. I really dislike that people think they're too important to do jobs. And that's why they delegate.
This is a book that I read a couple of years ago. And in fact, I let somebody borrow it and it just came back to me. So I'm super excited. My friend and colleague, Stephanie Sims, recommended this to me. Amanda Palmer, The Art of Asking. She also did a TED Talk about this. The big idea here is connection with people. And if our ego gets in the way, we can't have a true connection with people. When we don't roll up our sleeves and show somebody how to do something so that they can make it better with their skills and talent, why something is being done, which is what allows us to create this intangible value within our organization that comes across as something like service, for example. All of those things are really necessary. And if we don't stop and make a true connection with the people we outsource to, the people on our team that are doing jobs that tenure doesn't always matter. We've all got to do what needs to be done. And if somebody sees a problem, I'll use me as an example. If I see a problem, I will speak up. I'll be the first to say, I don't have the whole story. Here's something I'm seeing. Would you like to hear my perspective? So I don't force information or awareness or observations onto people. What I do is I point out that I'm noticing something, and if they want more information, they have an open conduit to something that might help them shape what they're doing differently or change gears if it is actually off track.
You're touching on two bases there, one being communication. And it's a two-way flow. Communication is between two or more people, not just one person talking and one person listening. Accountability based on expectations. You've got to set out the expectations when you're delegating. You've got to teach them what you're doing. You've got to describe it clearly, but you also have to set out the expectations of what you're hoping to get within a certain timeline, et cetera, et cetera. Those things have to be set, and good communication is integral to that.
It's a poor assumption that the person who you are giving a task to complete or a project to complete, it's a poor assumption that they're going to ask all the right questions to get what they need from you out of your own head.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a manager while I was the controller of the company once. My title was chief accountant, and I was told or asked to do something, and I always had questions, because one of the worst things that I find is when I fail in properly communicating and the person doesn't totally understand what I'm delegating or what I've given to the task I've given to them. They do it, they come back and I say, well, no, this is not what I wanted. Well, the thing is, one, I didn't communicate properly, but two, if they didn't understand, their usual answer is, well, I misunderstood what you wanted. They didn't ask the questions to get clarification and a full understanding of what the task was, what the expectations were. That's partially their fault, but partially my fault too in communication. And this gentleman, I would ask him questions about what he was assigning me, because he had a little different way of how he wanted things done. And he said, stop asking me questions when I give you something to do. And I said, I will never do that. I'm sorry. I said, I want to understand so I don't come back to you with the wrong objective. And then you say to me, this is not what I wanted. And I have to say, I misunderstood.
Everybody, you are listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. This is program 64, Delegation versus Dumping. You know, Mark, we got to just keep going with this whole thing about asking questions, because there's usually a fear around asking questions. We think we know what's going on. We're going to make assumptions, because usually if we are not asking questions, it's something about the culture. It's something about the relationship. I would have never asked a question because I was taught questions are a sign of weakness. How horrible is that? Is that something that happened to you too? Have you ever thought questions were a sign of weakness and you had to overcome and change that belief?
Not at all, because again, I'll go back to my upbringing as a farm boy. My father always taught me to ask questions to be sure I understood what was being asked of me, how to do it. Or on a farm, you can be injured quite easily and quickly. While in business, that's not quite so manually oriented with equipment and that sort of thing, you may not physically get hurt, but there are other hurts, being financial or psychological, or the ramifications of the entire business and the people around you. And that can be as serious as cutting your finger off or some of that. It's just not good.
Oh, and there are a lot of people that are afraid to ask questions. It's really interesting, because what was modeled to me was I always had to have the answer for every question I was asked. So if somebody asked me a question, I better have an answer, which made me a really good story creator when I did not have an answer. Let's see, here I was 21 years old. My first company was acquired. I was in the height of that, and I always had an answer at everything. Everything stopped at my door, so I was going to, even if I didn't have the answer, I was going to figure out what it needed to be quickly to keep things moving. I had this wonderful new boss. I went from being the boss and still staying the boss of my team, but being part of something larger, right? And so the president of the company, he just in passing, it was so funny. He'd just reel me back in. He'd let me go. The rope would run out, and I would know as soon as the rope ran out. And I was like, wait, what just happened? And he never actually formally sat me down and said, you got to stop that. Let's do it different. He helped me find where those boundaries were and figure out those nuances on my own so that I would ask more questions to understand and be clear. And that was the best experience that had ever happened to me, because I can only imagine the kind of tyrant boss I would be if I hadn't had him help shape my skills that way.
I had a good mentor originally as well that allowed me to ask questions and promoted that in the accounting firm. And I give him a lot of credit for my management style, my ability to recognize mistakes before I make them, hopefully, sometimes just after, but hopefully before. You need that sort of thing, but you got to be able to ask questions. I remember the first time I had somebody say to me, oh, always ask questions. There's never a stupid question. Well, I hate to say this, but there are. I've asked them, and I admit. But in the same respect, more often it's a stupid question only because it's the fourth and fifth and sixth time you've asked the same question. The initial question was probably not a stupid question. And people just have to think for themselves, understand. Some people it takes longer. They can get it the first or second time. Some people it takes longer. And as a manager and that sort of thing, you've got to recognize that and realize that person is going to be a good fit in the business work that I'm at. Their skill set, their abilities, their progression is good. I delegate things to them because they're smart and I can see where they're going as opposed to just where they are today.
But I'm wondering, what are the other things in company cultures that indicate there's a problem around? So we're dumping projects on people, we don't have clarity.
One, again, resolves or comes back to the topic of communication. But two, when the feedback comes, the person who is making the initial communication actually is receptive to it and appreciates the feedback, the questions, and is willing to give further explanation or consider changes in the direction of what's happening based on expertise that you hired. You don't hire good people and then tell them how to do it. Iacocca says, I hired people smarter than me and then I get out of their way. That's just what you do. And in delegating, it's the same sort of thing. You've hopefully hired well and hired people that have knowledge and expertise and potential so that you give them some direction and they can run with it. And you just have to keep an eye on it because you are still accountable and responsible for it ultimately. Mm-hmm. But you got to have that ability to allow them to do it, because culturally within a business, if people start to realize that, well, there's no point in giving feedback to my superiors because nothing happens anyways, they just feel beaten down and unappreciated. It's very hard on morale, and you're going to have good people leave.
So the lack of feedback could mean there's a culture problem somewhere because it's not received, it's not considered. So people are like, well, why would I even waste my time?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that mental attitude is a killer, not only for the business at the end, but for the individual as well. Mm-hmm. It's very hard on the individuals when they feel that way and going to work becomes a chore. They don't enjoy it. You hear people saying, well, you got to love what you do and then you never work another day in your life. Well, the thing is, if people are coming to work and are getting up in the morning going, oh, I hate the thought of going to work. It's terrible. I got a job to do and I'm going to do it because I need the money. And there's a lot of reasons why people go to work. But those who go because they enjoy what they do, what the challenges are, the people they work with, makes a huge difference, whether it's people on their teams, their peers, their subordinates, their superiors. It makes a huge difference. And how delegation is done is a huge part of it.
Yeah, you know, the situation that I've been in a lot, being part of consulting teams over the years, and then also when I was employees in a couple of different places, was I'm going to give you all this responsibility and you have no budget to actually get it done. So do it with your own work and time. And that is another cultural problem. If companies have big initiatives and they're not willing to put any resources behind it, what's the purpose of the work in the first place?
Especially in this day and age, in this economy, more often than not, profits are being squeezed in a lot of industries. And they say, well, you've got to do this. And you ask, well, what's the budget on this? Whatever. Well, it's been trimmed too because times are tough. You know, sorry, you don't have the money. No, you can't have the 4 people you need. I'll give you 2. That sort of thing is very telling on people. Physical exhaustion that is so hard on, again, both the business and the individual.
This dread of coming to work because I need a paycheck, that mentality, that has its health costs to the individuals. But I have to tell you, I think this one that we're talking about now has a higher health cost because now we're talking about burnout. Eventually somebody will leave if they don't like the job because they're never heard or they don't feel fulfilled. If somebody really cares and then they're buying into this, what they're being told, there's less, there's even less, now there's even less, good luck, good luck, good luck. People who really like that challenge, they're going to get burned out. And I've gotten burned out a couple of times from that, from just the lack of resources to get done what needed to be done. I was an emotional wreck, and that's no good for anybody.
Again, having worked in agriculture, I've been physically exhausted, but I've also been mentally exhausted. I worked in tax seasons for several years, and I much prefer being physically exhausted than mentally. And mentally may not just be long hours of mental work, but also the stresses and the toil taken by delegation issues, by communication issues, by morale issues, and the mental exhaustion that results can be a killer.
Understanding is a good first step so that we can figure out, how's this person going to respond? Will they perceive what I'm giving them as something that is just too good for me to do, so I'm giving it to them, versus this is a skill they need to learn because the path they told me they want to be on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny, when I was doing interviews and for new hires, I ask a lot of questions that nobody else asks. I want to know about the individual more than their skill set, but what they're like at home. Do you have pets? What's your pet? What sports did you play? If you played sports, were they individual sports? Were they team sports? And then I talk about things to do with detail. One of the questions I asked, I said, if I was in your home and looked at a refrigerator, what would I see stuck on the refrigerator? And if I see a calendar with a whole bunch of dates and details that they tell me, I know they're detail oriented. If they got family members, I find pictures of my sister, my cousin, my niece and nephew, whatever. You find out these things about them, and that gives you a pretty good idea in hiring and what they're doing, what skills will be utilized from the everyday life in the role they're going to be in, and whether they're going to be able to handle it. I also ask about relieving stress and what they do to relieve stress. One young lady says, I have a lovely husband. He greets me at the door every day with a glass of wine. Those sorts of things are important. And you've got to understand as an employer what triggers your people, what drives them, what motivates them, and try to respond to that. And this whole delegation issue, you can either propagate that or you can kill it. Doing it right or wrong, you're going to have one result or the other.
And this is a good lead in, because we want to be talking about what is the proper way to delegate. And you just set up the foundation for us. So if you were to break it down into steps, what would be the steps around delegation?
Well, first of all, you've got to have a firm understanding yourself of what the task is, what the objective is, and understand it clearly yourself. They say if you can't explain something in a few words, then you don't understand it. So hopefully you can communicate that properly to the people. Secondly, you've got to have enough knowledge of your people you have to delegate to understand whether their skill set, their ability today, and their potential for tomorrow will be able to do what you want them to do. So once you know what you got to do, who you can delegate to, you pick the right people and give them a proper explanation of what the task at hand is, your expected result is. At the beginning, you communicate throughout, you follow up, you get them to communicate back, you give you feedback. You don't micromanage, because standing over someone's shoulder is not going to achieve anything. One, you're not saving yourself any time, and you're probably making the person nervous and causing them to not be as productive as they could be. The other thing is to give them a deadline, because if it's open-ended, they don't know when they're supposed to be done, and you may have counted on it taking you a week if you did it yourself, and it's now taking them 2 weeks, and you're going, no, this needs to be done somewhere between a week and two, and less closer to the week had I done it myself. So those more or less sum it up as far as I'm concerned.
What we talked about is what is delegation, what is not delegating, what really is this dumping, what not delegating actually could be, and how it shows up in our culture, as well as how to properly delegate tasks. All of these things are intertwined, and they center around awareness of ourself, awareness of the other, and communication, and the fact that communication is a two-way street. Thank you for joining and listening today. You will find all the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P64. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 64. You can also search delegation versus dumping. With your actions as a leader, knowing what you want makes it easier to articulate, communicate, and to live the values and the common mission of the organization. Our actions in every single day create our company's culture, create the team we are on, create the way people interact with each other. It's up to us to foster the ability to ask questions, to delegate, to communicate, instead of just dumping tasks on them.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Duell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.